Hello and welcome to another episode of Neuro Nomads. If you are new to this community, we just wanted to say welcome. Please follow along for our upcoming podcasts and videos. And I'm Krista.
And I'm Dallia, and we are two moms that are expats and parenting neurodiverse children.
That's right. We're here to give you tips and share stories, things that we've had success in, and things that we found challenging traveling all across the world with our neurodiverse families. So I hope you enjoy this episode. We're going to be talking about how we discovered our kids were neurodiverse and what are some of the signs you can look for if you are wondering that your child possibly might have autism, ADHD, or a neurodiverse trait, and what are some things you can do about it. So Dallia, we were going to start with you this morning, my beautiful friend. Dallia is coming to us from Abu Dhabi. She has lived all across the world. She has 3 beautiful boys, and she has a wealth of experience and knowledge. If you want to find out more about her story, it's on our very first podcast, and you can check out that and listen to how we have come to this point and all the different places we've lived. But Dallia, let's start with you and hear how you kind of discovered that your family might not be the most average family.
Yeah, not so typical. So, hi from Abu Dhabi. It's evening, the sun is setting. I just want to point out I'm wearing a T-shirt that we bought when we were traveling Belgium together.
That's right.
It makes me feel a bit closer to you. So my first son was born when we were living in Fiji. And, I kind of thought I was a first-time mum. I just turned 30. I thought everything was normal. I kind of knew he had a lot of energy, right from, I would say, when he was in my tummy. I knew that he had a lot of energy. But when you start noticing things, is you expect to do a certain amount of things for your children when they're small. But as they grow older, you expect them to be able to become more independent in some of these things. We were living, I would say, in Japan when I first noticed that things were a little bit different for him, and it was more like a school thing. He ultimately ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD. So in Japan, he started his schooling, his proper schooling. He was about 5 when we arrived there, and started schooling. And when it came time to learn to read and stuff like that, 6 years old, 7 years old, first grade, second grade, and he was struggling with that. And that's when the teachers all say, all the teachers and this person at the school and that person at the school, they all call you in for meetings and make you feel like the worst parent in the world because your poor little sausage is struggling. And but once we worked through that with him, and for him it was more like, once he got the reason why it would be fun to read, he became the most ferocious reader I've ever met. And, but it's such a horrible feeling when your little one is struggling with something at school, and then you get hauled in by all these professionals to tell you basically that your parenting is bad. But anyway, and that's where I think, which we'll discuss later on, that's where diagnosis is so important, because it takes the blame away from yourself that you're not a bad mother, that you do have a good routine, and things like that I was trying to put into place. And we had a good routine. So behavior wise, there were no behavioral issues with him at all. He was just struggling to concentrate because he had ADHD. And so there was a lot of guilt and blame and hard feelings throughout that process. Then when he was 7 or 8, he was diagnosed ADHD. And then, we tried a plethora of options and even a bit of medication, and he was not a candidate for that. So we've ultimately decided with him, he's 18 now, we decided with him that medication is not for him, and we try other tools to help him cope with the everyday stresses of having that. He also had some sensory issues. He doesn't like loud noises and stuff like that. And from a little kid, if you take him to an arcade or something like that, he would have a meltdown. But, if
Okay.
you don't know anything about neurodiversity, you don't know. So we just think that that's our kid. Then when he was about 2.5,
Maybe you justify it. You think maybe they're tired, maybe they're hungry. You're not maybe thinking about, is he on the spectrum? Is he, sensitive
yeah,
to noise? You just don't.
100%.
That's the first go to, I think, for a lot of people.
And you expect meltdowns in a arcade at 3 years, 4 years old. You expect it. So tired, hungry, too much sugar,
Mhm.
things like that. So you don't think you if you knew, then you would know. But he was my first child, and I didn't know. When he was just over or just under 2 years old, I had my second, and my
Yeah.
second child was so quiet. So
Mm.
he was just so quiet. And when my first child was commando crawling at 5 months because he had to be somewhere, my
Yes.
second child at 8 months old was just sitting quietly, and he wasn't trying to crawl. He wasn't doing anything, and he was just so happy. I could just take him out to a restaurant, plonk him in a chair, and he would just sit there. I could do anything with him, whereas my first one was busy, busy, busy all the time. And I knew he was clever because he was always asking questions. Like, he would ask the teachers, like, or me, he would say, like, why is the moon white? And you
Yeah.
would be like, okay, hold on a second, let me just Google that, did we even have Google in those days? But, he used to ask all these questions. And so he had such an inquiring mind, and he was into everything, and he didn't sit still for a second, and he had all these bright ideas and amazing imagination. And then my second one came along, and he's just sitting there. He's 8 months old, and
Yeah.
he's just sitting there, and he's just looking, and he's smiling. So my thought was that, oh, he's such a lovely child. He's going to grow up. He's going to be one of those people that everybody loves, but he's not the brightest tool in the box or sharpest tool in the box. He's just going to be one of those quiet, kids that's not too bright, but everybody will love him. And it turns out actually that he was super gifted, taught himself to read at 3 years old, and which is one of the signs that we can talk about is hyperlexia, which
Mm.
means reading at before the age that you're meant to read, being far ahead of your reading age. So he taught himself to read at 3. We could see how bright he was. At 5, he's doing times tables. And so I knew he was gifted. But
Mhm.
again, I knew nothing about, at this point, nothing about neurodiversity, nothing about that giftedness usually comes with autism. Hyperlexia is one of the traits of autism. You could have either go on the side of learning difficulties, or you can go on the side of giftedness and hyperlexia. It's the opposite of dyslexia. And so, there were all these like little traits that you don't realize if you don't know.
Yeah.
So going to my youngest, who was 8 years younger than my oldest and 6 years younger than my second. At this point, my oldest is diagnosed ADHD. My middle one, just an angel child that just gets 110% for everything. And I should have also known, if I had known, my middle one, when he used to tantrum, he used to internalize the tantrum, and he used to stand facing the wall and just like shut down and be quiet. And then there would just be like a tear of anger just like running down his face. And I love that. I mean, who doesn't want a toddler that tantrums quietly, as opposed to the toddlers that stamp and hit and stuff like that. So, but I just didn't realize that there was another face of neurodiversity. So
Yes.
I had no idea about that. Even with my oldest son ADHD diagnosis, I didn't identify as a neurodiverse family. And then my youngest, who came 8 years after, when we were going through school, and then he was like struggling a little bit at school. And then the teachers were the same. They were kind of, oh, we need to have this looked at and we need to have that looked at. And then I'd had all that same nonsense with my oldest one. So I was my third kid. I was much more relaxed as a mother, and I knew that whatever his issues were, if it's dyslexia or ADHD, whatever it was, that the school kept on saying, "Oh, we must see this or this. He's struggling with that." I kind of thought, oh, these kids, they all get there in the end. My oldest one is proof of that. And then COVID hit. And then, all these kids are sitting in front of the iPads listening to the teacher, my kids running around the lounge. I even recorded it and put it on social media about all other kids sitting like this during homeschooling, my kid.
Yeah.
And then I put a video of him running around. So, and then the school was pushing us to see what is this learning difficulties that he's having? Why is he struggling at school? And then, it was so difficult during COVID. But then at the end result was he ended up being diagnosed with autism, I think ADHD, and he actually has a PDA profile. And then I'm thinking, oh, well, sure, I'm not such a horrible teacher. I mean, I am a horrible teacher, but, here I am trying to teach an autistic, dyslexic, ADHD kid how to read and write at 6 years old. And what do I know? I'm not a teacher, so it getting the diagnosis takes away a lot of that guilt and stuff like that. But, now that I know, and also I have to say that when he was getting diagnosed, every question they asked me about what are the signs and traits of autism, I recognized in my middle one. So without having to get him diagnosed, I realized that he actually is very much definitely autistic. And I see that not with the academics, because academics is fine, but with his anxiety, social anxiety, executive functioning problems, and sensory issues with his eating. He hates different textures, and my oldest one hates labels, like all his pajamas have got holes in the butt because he doesn't cut them out. He rips them out. So, these are things. And now, once I got the diagnosis, I then decided to educate myself on neurodiversity, and I threw myself into all the books I could read. I did a course through England called Understanding Autism, a 12-week college course about understanding autism. And I've really made this my life now. Before this, I was in wellness and nutrition and alternative therapies like Reiki and massage and stuff like that. And that was my everything. I only listened to books on that. I only, studied that and did courses on that. And so now I did an about turn and decided to educate myself so that I can advocate for my 3 children and know everything I can. So that's it happened slowly over time. But now that I know what I know, I would have spotted, if I had known, I would have spotted my kids from a mile away. I would have spotted that they, on the spectrum with all the sensitivity issues. And I would now say I would definitely spot in myself and my husband the neurodiversity and things that we thought were normal in our family, but turns out that we're not so normal, So it's been an interesting journey, and that realization that that actually my husband and I are not so neurotypical either. You think, oh, I think like this. Surely everybody thinks like that, but it's not to be. And that's definitely where our kids come from. They come from us.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing that, Dal. Dal and I will go out and we'll be out and doing something socially, and we can spot, and we'll be like, oh, that kid's on the spectrum, or like, oh, that parents, or we'll meet people socially, you and I, and we'll like self-diagnose people like all over the place. Because like you said, once you know, you can't unsee what you know, just power. And it sounded like for you, just for the listeners out there, I mean, you mentioned PDA profile, which we will get into if some people don't know, maybe not know what that is. We won't get into it now, but we can talk about it in one of our later podcasts. But it sounded, just to wrap it up, that a lot of your figuring out that your kids were unique was through the reading marker. So with the one, they weren't reading on time, right? With J, your first. With your second, D, he was reading super early. So I think that's something to note, is that reading is a very good indicator of whether your kids may be neurodiverse, whether they may have a learning challenge. And I for sure found that with my kids too. Yeah.
I would say, just to round that off, most definitely that those things, if you don't know, then those things make you start looking at to why are they struggling, or why are they doing that early. They're not typical. They're outside of the typical.
Right.
And just on the PDA point, we will discuss this at other ones, but parenting a PDA child flies in the face of everything you've ever known about parenting other children, autistic or not. So the way I parent my PDA child is completely different to my non-PDA children. And that also causes conflict, because the other two are like, he gets away with things that we wouldn't have dreamed of getting away. But it's a nervous system disorder. And, number one in our household is regulating his nervous system so that there can be learning happening in the frontal lobe. And that we can do a whole episode just on that. Some nervous system disorders.
Yeah. So PDA stands for what's the
Pathological demand avoidance.
right?
And but a more neuroaffirming way of talking about PDA is persistent drive for autonomy, and we'll go into that completely another time. But a funny thing about my older ones learning to read was that when they were like 6 and 4, they would be playing computer games together, and the 6-year-old will say to the 4-year-old, "D, read that for me. What does that say?" And he would like read the instructions for the game or whatever. So, so it was very handy for a child struggling to read. His little brother, could read the instructions on the computer games. But
and you were telling a
what
cute
about
story.
you? How did you find out that your kids weren't exactly typical like all the other kids around?
Well, I know, but I was just thinking about your funny story about Jay. When you were going in for an interview when he was first in school, and you were starting to kind of piece together, maybe things aren't going as smoothly as the teacher wanted them to go, and they had that was such a funny story. I totally think you should say it.
Okay, so when he was in like pre-K or something, I don't know, he was like 3 or 4 or something like that. We were in parent-teacher conferences, and the teacher was like, he's got such an active imagination, and he thinks he's a superhero, and it's all very well and good, like sometimes, but there's a time and a place, he constantly 24/7 thinks he's a superhero. So my husband and I look at her and we're like, don't you believe in superheroes? Because he was our little Jay, and we used to call him Sparkle Eyes, because he just was just such a happy child, and with such an active imagination. And as I said before, because my husband and I are not 100% neurotypical, for us that kind of dynamic is normal. We think, doesn't everybody behave like we do as a family?
Did you know that we're superheroes too?
We're a superhero family. Yeah. What's your problem?
Yeah. Oh no, that's so cute. I absolutely love that story, because these kids are superheroes, and what they have to work through, every day just to kind of be in society and perform in school, it takes superhero talent to do that.
And superhero talent to parent them.
Exactly. Definitely. Definitely. So I have 5 children, and 3 of them I would say are on the spectrum, or neurodiverse. Well, actually 4 of them. 4 of them I would say are neurodiverse, with many, many different kind of presentations of how that has come up. So I'll talk about my oldest, O. I was a young mom when I had him, and I really had no idea about what parenting really looked like. And I think, you know, when you have your first child, you're kind of like fresh into parenting. You don't really know what to expect. I had experience like babysitting and whatnot when I was younger, but I think when you have like those love eyes for your child, you're like, he's perfect. Like they could do no wrong. Like, oh, they're a bit slow, but you kind of like make these excuses. And I found that I was doing that a lot with O. He was born with gastroschisis, which was part of his small intestine was outside of his stomach. So he had to have quite a few surgeries when he was first born. And as he was going for those milestones like crawling, walking, talking, all of that, he was delayed quite a bit. But I chalked it up to, oh, like he had these setbacks when he was a newborn. So it's probably because of that. So I didn't really think too much about it. And I think, if you have a sick child, there are, or if your baby is preemie, there can be some delays that may not be a sign of autism or, neurodiversities, but also it could be a sign. So I think it's really important to explore, if you start seeing those delays, just make sure. And so with he was delayed. So I did kind of feel a bit nervous, like why isn't he doing this? And I would go to like mom groups and see like other kids were talking or smiling or making eye contact, and he wasn't doing those things. And I did feel a bit at the time, looking back, like, oh, something might not be right, but you just kind of push it to the back of your mind. So for me, that was kind of early signs. And then, just like you, really, it's trying to put them into those schooling settings. I remember he was in preschool, and I got a call from the preschool teacher, and the teacher said, I think he was about 4. She said, your son bit somebody today. And I was devastated. And I was like, what? Like, I've never seen him bite anybody, like, not anything. And she's like, yeah, she said, it's really late for that type of behavior. Looking back to that conversation, like, I think without, she was sensitively trying to, like, maybe tell me this maybe isn't normal, but I was young and I just didn't realize what she was trying to say to me. I really regret, actually. I wish she had just been more straightforward to be like, hey, like maybe you should like take him to the pediatrician. And so that was kind of like for me, like a first kind of warning sign that things were maybe not as normal as I had thought in my mind they were. And after that biting incident, things kind of started showing up more and more. And for him, it presented like aggressive kind of behavior, playing with other kids in the neighborhood. Like I'd have a mom friend over with her son, and he couldn't like imagination play with them, and he would just get frustrated, and he'd end up trying to chase them or be physical with them because he wasn't able to like play in the way that the other neurotypical child was playing, like with cars or something like that. That's another thing, they talk about a sign that, when your child, if they line up all their toys, is a early sign of autism, or not being able to play with the toys. They just kind of sit, and they maybe want to be more physical, but they're not able to have that imagination play so much. And I definitely saw that with Oliver. I would buy him a lot of toys, and he wouldn't play with them. And I would just be like, what is wrong with this child? Like, why does not you not want to play with toys? And he was just so attracted to the TV. He just wanted to be on the TV all the time. And I was so concerned about it because I was like, why is he like just wants to like watch cartoons? And I remember I would tell him, okay, like Saturday morning, like you can watch cartoons because we don't have school. And he would just like start getting up earlier and earlier and earlier just to like get on to the TV. And I was like, this does not seem right. But still, I did not get him diagnosed until he was like in his teens, because as a mom, I think I just covered so if he wasn't doing well in school, I got him a tutor. If he was struggling with behaviors, I read books and sat him down and like worked one-on-one with him. And nobody even suggested that he might be autistic, which he ended up being high functioning autism, Asperger's, which they don't diagnose anymore. But he definitely had ADHD and Asperger like qualities in how he presented. When we finally did get him diagnosed, it was like he was in his early teen years. Everything made so much sense, and it was such a healing thing for all of us, because for so many years, like you said, you just feel like ashamed because socially, you would go out and they might be one way at home, and then you go to the grocery store and they're just freaking out from all the stimulation and you don't know why. You think they're being so naughty, and it's not that at all. It's like they're just overwhelmed with the fluorescent lights and the echoing noises. And had I understood, I feel so awful now, because it's like I could have been so much more compassionate at the time. But you don't know what you know until you know. So so that was my oldest, and now he's 24. He's doing amazing. He's a happy, functioning adult. He works and supports himself, and I'm so proud of him. But boy, had I have known what I know now, I would have parented him very differently. And I
You
almost
would have had more support.
I would have had much more support. I just felt very alone in it, to tell you the truth, and I
Mm-hmm.
felt very ashamed, and I would just stay back from any social events because I was so worried, like he's going to do something to another kid, or I'm going to get that phone call like saying, whatever, or I get the odd looks from the parents like, oh, like they must not be parenting their child very well, And I was always told, like, you just need to be more consistent. There needs to be more discipline. And, that whole old thinking of
Bad
raising
parent.
bad parent. And it was, yeah. So I was a single mom for a number of years with my
And
oldest. And
how
then
old
I
were
met my
you when I was born? You were very young. How old were you when I was born?
when O
Yeah.
was born. Yeah.
It's so much
And
to take on.
yeah, so much. And I think as a young parent, I was already dealing with a bit of stigma around being a young unmarried parent. And I was trying to overcompensate, I think, for that for many, many years. But when I met my husband, I think O was 7 when I met him. And there was immediate connection between them. And, it was like a beautiful thing. But we went on to have 3 other boys and then a daughter. And when my other son came along, it was 10 years later. And I was like so hyper vigilant on looking for like these signs. I was like, is he going to be the same? Like, and so when N was born, I was watching like every milestone, and I was noticing like, yeah, like there are some similarities. And I knew my husband's sister had had an autistic boy. And so again, the trait was in the family line. So I was aware of that. And so I was just watching every little thing. So when he was starting to present around 2 years old, he was delayed at speech. He was delayed crawling, lots of delays. I had someone come in and assess him from mental health. So I called like the mental health child development center. I lived in Canada at the time. Now I live in Florida. I didn't say that, but and I called the child development, and they came. A lady came for a couple of weeks, and she like did like these games and like saw like how he was, and she's like, I think he's just like got a really strong personality. But in my
You
heart, I
know,
was
you know.
no, I am like. But then I was always like second guessing myself. I'm like, oh, you're just traumatized because of you didn't catch it early enough with your first. But anyways, so it's going on now too, and he's also on the spectrum. My middle, my second, and he presents similar to my oldest, but also different. So I guess I don't want to talk too much longer, but I'll wrap it up to say that um, it looks different for every child, and it also looks different for different ages and stages. And so if I was to give like 3, signs to be watching for, I would definitely say like around grade 2, children will often start presenting stronger resistance to the education system. They won't be hitting those milestones socially. They won't be hitting those milestones like in the reading category. And they'll start maybe school, refusing, like not liking school. And I think when you start seeing these signs, if you can just put yourself aside, and this is what I would have told my younger self, and go and seek out the help. Go to the pediatrician, talk to the school teacher about it, and know that if your child is diagnosed with autism, and this is another thing I didn't understand, I didn't want to get this label on my child. So I was so scared to get him diagnosed. And we'll talk more about diagnosis later and different ways, you can go about diagnosis. But if I had just put my pride aside, and just gone and just said, hey, like, this is happening, I would have had so much more help, and I would have had the resources, and like you said, the shame would have come off of me that I'm not parenting right, or I didn't eat organic food during my pregnancy. It must have been because of that, like, or I'm not consistent enough, or maybe because we're expat and we've moved so many times, we've caused like this trauma or something, right? And so I think it's really important to get the information as early as possible. If you see those warning signs, just go and ask questions, be curious, know that it's not you, know that, if you can get this child help, it's going to be such a weight off. So yeah, so that I'll wrap it up to say that I have other children with different tendencies, but we'll get into those in another episode.
I think,
yeah,
I think your story resonates so much in different ways, like feeling the shame.
yeah,
And if I can give one piece of advice is change your expectations when you get that diagnosis. And yes, you'll grieve, because you'll grieve that you're not going to have the typical parenting experience that
yeah,
parents of neurotypical children have, and
yeah.
they don't reach the same milestones. But you showed us that there is hope and there is light at the end of the tunnel, with your
There's,
son, who now is an adult. He is functioning by himself. It gives us with younger children, hope, and realization. I think my biggest thing for me with my kids was, especially my youngest, is that you change your expectation of him becoming a successful career to
yeah,
being happy. And if that
yeah,
means being a chef, not to say that chef's not a good career, but like if he can't even be capable to become a chef, maybe he can be a cook, or a gardener, or something that will make him happy. I mean, even
yeah,
if he works as a checkout person,
yeah,
but he's gainfully employed, he feels like he is contributing to society, and is a happy person, then
yeah,
that is a win and that's a success. And for each of our children, success will mean a different thing. And I think that's such a thing that you have to obviously grieve for the life you're not going to have with your child, but also just change your expectation to just to wish them happiness in life. And as a parent of a neurodiverse child, you spend your life advocating for them, and fighting the system, and fighting the schools, and fighting the people that don't understand.
yeah,
And my most frustrating thing is is all these experts that have studied these conditions,
yeah,
but they have absolutely zero idea
mhm,
of what it's like to be these children. And so that's why
yeah,
I cannot say it enough times that my
mhm,
best learning I've ever got is speaking to autistic adults.
mhm,
So people that they know what it's like to grow up being misunderstood, and
yeah,
being overlooked, because people put them in the too hard basket, or people misunderstand them. And
yeah,
there's the people that have changed the world are neurodiverse, because they're not typical. They
yeah,
they're not neurotypical, they're neurodiverse, and these are the people that change the world. And I think there's more people in this world that we realize that actually have the same struggles that we're going through, and that's what we want with this podcast. And today we've only spoken about neurodiversity, but I think from going forward, we will tie it into actually being expats, because it adds a layer of complexity to parenting neurodiverse children.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't get into that too much, but one thing I will say, I touched on it, that when you are expat, some of these tendencies that you will see that are, signs that your child may be on the spectrum or maybe neurodiverse will present more with the transitions of moves. And that's a bad thing. It can actually help you propel forward to get the help in place right away. Those signs probably would have happened later. Let's just say if you hadn't moved.
Yes.
The signs still would have come out within them, but it may have been delayed a bit because you would have a very structured, consistency, which is really important for them. But, as an expat, you have to learn how to build that in, and we'll touch on that in a later episode as well. But
exactly. Sorry, I just wanted to add that because I didn't know, with D, when we moved from Ukraine, where he had a Russian-speaking nanny and he could speak Russian at all of 2.5 years old, used to ask him how old he was in Russian, and he used to say "Dva godika." So and then we moved to Japan, and he was such a happy kid. I said he was always smiling, and then all of a sudden depressed for 3 months until he had settled in. And that was, if I had known that this was a trait of autism, or not, coping well with change or something, that's something that, had I known, I would have picked that up, that he struggles so much with moving. And just before we wrap up, I just want to last podcast I gave a book recommendation called Untypical, and it's by Pete Warmby, and I highly recommend that because he is a autistic adult that has written a book about what his experience is like going to school, going to university, and then working as a teacher in a school. So he really gets what it's like to be an autistic child. And I also have a fantastic recommendation called Neurotribes by Steve Silberman, and that gives an excellent outline of how society has looked at autistic people throughout the ages, from those kind of nutty recluse professor or billionaires, or things like that, or the village idiot or something like that, or these savant, they used to call them savant idiots, because they were so clever, they could know exactly how many cattle they had and things like that, but they couldn't hold a conversation with the society. So it's fascinating and eye-opening at how far we've come in understanding these neurotypes. So that's my advice.
Thank you. I'm ready to those myself, but I will definitely get them. We'll put a link in the description below if you want to check those books out. Thank you so much. You're always so full of resources. I love it. But we'll just close out to say thank you for joining us today. We hope that you found this podcast helpful and laughed along with and understood, laughed along with us and know that you are not alone. You have a place here with us, and we love you all. All right.
And please comment. We want to hear from you as well. So please email us at 2 neuronomads@gmail.com, or whatever platform you're watching on this, comment below, and we would love to hear from you, because we want to learn as much as the information we're giving. We want to learn from other parents in our situation as well.
That's right. All right. Signing off for now. We'll talk to you soon from Florida.
Bye.
Bye.